Imagine waking up to a message that was never meant to exist in your timeline. Not a tweet, not a leak from a whistleblower, not a government document quietly buried on page 417 of a bill, but a physical object that shouldn't be possible at all. A newspaper, delivered yesterday, yet carbon dated to the year 2050. Not a prediction, not a simulation, a printed financial record from the future, and the headline doesn't mention war, pandemics, or first contact. It says something far stranger and far more specific. XRP standardizes interdimensional trade at $750,000. That single line reframes everything you think you know about money, time, and value. Because if this document is real, even hypothetically, then price is no longer driven by markets, it's driven by destiny. According to the story attached to this artifact, the paper was discovered wrapped in a sealed polymer sleeve that does not exist in current manufacturing databases. The substrate is neither plastic nor paper, but a composite material with molecular bonds that modern labs cannot reproduce. The ink contains isotopic ratios that do not occur naturally on Earth today. MIT physicists brought in quietly to examine it, could not explain how it was made, but confirmed it could not have been produced using any known 2020s technology, and the most unsettling detail, the layout, typography, and ad structures align perfectly with how financial publications are expected to evolve by mid-century. Whoever made this understood the future of media better than today's best forecasters. The lead article doesn't describe XRP as a cryptocurrency. It doesn't even call it a digital asset. It refers to XRP as the temporal reserve asset, the unit of account used to reconcile value between divergent timelines once chrono-displacement commerce became possible. This future, humanity didn't just learn to move through time. It learned that time itself required a neutral settlement layer. Every attempt to use fiat collapsed under paradox. Every attempt to use commodities failed due to causality loops. Bitcoin fragmented across timelines. Ethereum forked itself into irrelevance. Only one ledger, according to the article, remained synchronized across temporal states, XRP. The paper explains that once limited forms of backward and forward resource acquisition became possible, markets exploded into something no economist had ever modeled. Traders weren't just arbitraging geography or interest rates, they were arbitraging history. Buy energy credits in 2035, sell them in 2070, acquire rare earth materials before wars made them scarce, hedge climate outcomes by purchasing land rights before sea levels rose. The problem wasn't demand, the problem was settlement. You cannot clear a transaction when the counterparty exists in another point on the timeline unless the ledger itself is invariant to time. XRP, according to the article, became that invariant ledger. So this is where the $750,000 price shows up. Not as hype, not as speculation, but as a point of equilibrium. The article explains that after decades of trial and error, economists in the future realized something pretty counterintuitive. The price of XRP actually needed to rise high enough that its velocity slowed to almost zero. If XRP moved too quickly, it would destabilize temporal markets, but if it moved too slowly, liquidity would fracture. At around $750,000 per unit, XRP finally reached what the paper calls chronostability, a price point where enough value could be transferred per transaction to settle cross-time trades, but without excessive movement of tokens. So in other words, the price wasn't chosen, it just kind of emerged. Inserted into the newspaper, there's this handwritten note, written in ink that actually matches current isotopic composition, which suggests the note itself was written pretty recently. It reads, "By before the Great Convergence, December 21st, 2024. No signature, no explanation, just that date. Astrophysicists consulted for the story point out that December 21st, 2024 coincides with a rare alignment involving the galactic plane, Earth, and several massive stellar bodies, a configuration that, according to some pretty theoretical physics papers, could, under some extreme assumptions, reduce temporal decoherence. Mainstream science, of course, dismisses all this as fringe, but the future paper doesn't. In the article's narrative, the Great Convergence is described as the moment when multiple probabilistic timelines collapsed into a dominant sequence, the one where XRP became the anchor. Before that convergence, price history was volatile and honestly, pretty contested. But after it, the article claims, XRP's valuation became retrospectively inevitable. The implication here is unsettling, that once the convergence happened, XRP's future value actually propagated backward as a sort of informational gravity, not causation, attraction. It's like a black hole forming in time instead of space. The paper even references our current era, describing the 2020s as, well, the accumulation paradox period, when the asset was widely available yet systemically misunderstood. It notes that most participants assume price discovery worked the same way it always had, unaware that they were interacting with what would later become fixed temporal infrastructure. The article compares it to people in the 1800s trading land on Manhattan without knowing skyscrapers were inevitable, not because of zoning laws, but because of physics and density. What makes this narrative so compelling, so unsettling, is that it doesn't rely on secrecy. In the story, the information was always public. XRP's fixed supply, its deterministic finality, its lack of reliance on energy or minor incentives, its ability to settle value without probabilistic outcomes. The article argues that these properties weren't just good for banks or payments, they were prerequisites for operating across timelines. Humanity didn't choose XRP for time travel. Time travel selected XRP. The ethical section of the future article is brief but honestly haunting. It asks whether knowledge of the future invalidates free will, or whether free will is the mechanism by which the future asserts itself. The anonymous time traveler, according to the note, understood this paradox. By delivering the newspaper, they weren't changing history, they were completing a loop. The act of revealing the outcome was part of the outcome. Those who dismissed it would do so in every timeline. Those who paid attention would always have paid attention. Toward the end, the article reflects on how people in the 2020s argued endlessly about price targets, market cycles and adoption curves, unaware that they were debating shadows of a structure that had already resolved elsewhere in time. It suggests that value, once anchored across timelines, ceases to be speculative and becomes architectural. XRP wasn't an investment in that future, it was a component of it. The final paragraph of the future newspaper does not urge readers to buy, sell, or hold. Instead, offers a quiet observation. Every civilization eventually invents a way to measure itself across time. For ours, that measure was XRP. The handwritten note ends with a single line beneath the date, almost as an afterthought. You were never late, you were early, before time knew where it was going. If this story is fiction, it's a mirror, reflecting how narratives shape belief and belief shapes markets. If it's something stranger, then the question isn't what XRP will be worth. The question is whether value itself is already decided, waiting patiently for us to catch up. Please remember, I am not a licensed financial advisor. The content presented in these videos is purely for entertainment purposes. I always encourage viewers to conduct their own research and consult with professionals before making any financial decisions. Thanks so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up and don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Also, make sure you turn on the notifications to be the first to know when I release new content. I'm excited to catch up with you in the upcoming video. Take care.